What's the most bizarre historical fact you know? Henrik Ibsen was a Norwegian playwright / who suffered a stroke. One day, his nurse suggested his condition was improving. To which he responded verbatim, on the contrary, and promptly died. I stole this from a book called The Encyclopedia of Useless Information. What if he already had passed and only briefly resuscitated to correct her? Or he was actually on the way to getting better, but didn't like the nurse, so he died just to spite her. In the year 892, Sigurd the Mighty of Orkney was feeling pretty proud of himself after killing his foe, Melbrigd. So proud, in fact, that he cut off Brigd's head and strapped it to his horse's saddle. Unfortunately for Sigurd, he sat in such a way that caused Brigd's teeth to rub against his legs and create an open wound. The wound became infected, and Sigurd eventually died as a result. Karma bites. The youngest person to ever give birth was a 5-year-old girl. Her name is Lina Marcela Medina de Gerardo, and she is still alive today. Her son died in his 40s, so she actually outlived the child she gave birth to. To make matters worse, her father is suspected to have fathered the child. That was a confusing and creepy sentence to write. She may have been in her 40s when he died too. Unreal. The first US conscript of WWI was the father of the first US conscript of WWII. Conscripts were chosen at random for both wars. This is some Stanley Yelnats shit right here. All because of their no good dirty rotten pig stealing great grandfathers. I can fix that. Suck it, Sean. She needs me. The Anglo-Zanzibar War is the shortest military conflict in history, lasting 38 to 45 minutes. I learned this recently from a TV show that had nothing to do with history. I bet if they did a documentary on it, the film would be longer than the war itself. In 1767, when British Captain Samuel Wallis journeyed to Tahiti to trade, his crew found that the natives would exchange iron for sex. As a result, the crew began prying iron nails and fittings from anything they could find. To the point Scott had to end the trip early because the crew had begun to remove the nails from the deck boards and beams, literally taking the ship apart in harbor. And I thought I was thirsty. You'll never know true thirst if you've never seen Tahiti women. George Washington spent roughly 15% of his money on liquor. Maybe due to the fact he didn't know dinosaurs existed. I, too, am often driven to drink at the thought of large, mysterious reptiles, or the absence of that thought. Vikings went as far as modern-day Morocco to fight as mercenaries. The Byzantine emperor had his Varangian Guard, personal bodyguard, composed mainly of Norsemen. Harold had great traveled the rivers of Russia to join the Varangian Guard. He raided the length and breadth of the Mediterranean before returning to the north and make himself king of 2 nations by right of blood and battle. Then he invaded England and became the second of 3 kings to die in that land in that year. His life was basically a metal album, only without the slow and quiet bits. I had no idea he was that badass. I literally knew him as the guy who tired out Harold Godwinson's army, so they got won by William the Conqueror. One pope dug up the previous pope's corpse and put it on trial for corruption, found it guilty, and threw 3 of his finger bones into a river. Didn't they cut off his fingers, rebury him, dig him up again, and throw in him the river? During the Apollo 8 flight, astronaut Commander Frank Borman came down with a stomach bug and ended up vomiting and shitting himself at the same time. There was barf and diarrhea floating around the space capsule, and the other astronauts had to put on gas masks to block the stench while they cleaned it up. In a similar vein, on a space mission, I can't remember which one, before vacuum toilets were invented, a crew member took a shit and didn't bag it up, resulting in a fat log floating about the cabin. On the mission transcript you can see that there was a discussion about who did it, and no one ever owned up. Captain's log. Number 1. Is this your number 2? This is comedy. Martin Luther hallucinated demons in the bathroom all the time. Good God. For a second I was thinking of Martin Luther King. I'm so damn stupid. I totally duck and did too. What a terrifying dream. When FDR died in office, the Manhattan Project, atomic bomb, was so secret that his vice president didn't even know about it, and upon taking oath Truman had to be briefed on the existence of the bomb. I just learned today from my 80-year-old friend that his dad worked on the Manhattan Project. He told me that this dad would leave for days at a time and couldn't tell his wife. The FBI, my friend said, maybe it was a similar agency. CIA showed up one day to question the wife to see if she knew where her husband was. They were trying to find out if the husband had been sharing secrets. She told them she didn't know anything. This ultimately kicked off the destruction of their marriage. She had no idea what to think about what her husband was wrapped up in, and he couldn't tell his wife until years later. By then it was too late for their marriage to recover. Friend said dad worked with uranium, but had no health effects as a result. He was in metallurgy by background. My grandfather worked at, I believe, Area 51 during the Cold War as an engine designer for spy planes. You could probably guess which one. My grandmother talks about Fed stopping in to do the same sort of interviews, but also that they spent a week or two doing in-depth ones before he was accepted to the project. To this day he has yet to tell us if it was actually at Area 51. But I can't think of another place at the time with a long enough runway. He's 86 now, and I would love to hear the whole story before he dies. Edit. I'm bad at the English thing. Please ask him and bring it back to us. A cat supposedly survived the sinking of the Bismarck and went on to survive 2 more sinkings. Very oversimplified. For more info look up Unsinkable Sam. The cat definitely sunk those ships. Little bastard got away with it too. One of my favorite ones is the fact that Kim Jong-il was a big movie buff, and at some point he was just fed up with shitty North Korean films, so he just ordered this director from South Korea to be kidnapped so they could have cooler films. Pulgassery, the story about how that movie got made, and the resulting escape would make a great movie in and of itself. It looks like a documentary was made about it in 2016. It's called The Lovers and the Despot. Albert Einstein was offered the presidency of Israel on November 17, 1952, following the death of Israel's first president, Chaim Weizmann. He declined, saying he lacked the natural aptitude and the experience to deal properly with people to do the job. Smart fellow. Yeah. He should become a scientist. He seems pretty smart. Now, 10 years from now nobody's going to remember who he was. Just watch. Isn't there a statue? I'm pretty sure that's how history is taught nowadays. It was once common to sell Peter tanners. They used it to soften hides to make clothing. They started off with used camel urine, but eventually the workers started to use their own, which is suspected to have started in France. One dude's piss worked especially well, and it was because he had syphilis, which used to be treated with mercury. Eventually, after the connection was made with mercury, it was used on its own to treat the hats, and the workers often developed mercury poisoning as a result of working with it. Symptoms of mercury poisoning include tremors, hallucinations, paranoia and psychosis. And that's where Lewis Carroll's Mad Hatter came from. Jesus, what an emotional roller coaster. Reddit r/nononono. Well, I fell down the rabbit hole of that sub. The Polish army tamed a bear and gave it a rank. During WWI, a German armed merchant cruiser called SMS Cap Trafalgar disguised herself as a British converted ocean liner, RMS Carmania, to infiltrate and sink British supply convoys. But not long after leaving port she ran into the actual RMS Carmania, who sunk her after a battle lasting several hours, though Carmania was only barely still afloat herself. There's also accounts that state Carmania was coincidentally disguised as Cap Trafalgar at the same time, but that's unsubstantiated and likely made up to make the story even more bizarre. Spider-Man meme are like this fact. The first thing that they did after working so hard to disguise herself was become undone. In the 13th century, Pope Gregory IX basically declared war on the cats of the world. Yeah, didn't he kinda cause the plague? Yeah, he did. Great times. I imagine the rats were happy with his declaration. The most expensive opera costume of all time was worn by Adele in a party at Covent Garden in 1895. It was worth 15 million. 15 meters by today's standards or 1895 standards? I'm gonna guess by today's standards, because a 15-meter suit in 1895 would cost nearly £2 billion today. Switzerland has accidentally invaded Liechtenstein 3 times. Accidentally, once is an accident, twice is a coincidence, 3 times? That's a pattern. The funny thing is that they did. Once an army corps got lost and made its way into a Liechtensteinian town. Another time they miscalculated the amount of propellant in their missiles and they hit a Liechtenstein forest. And another time that I can't remember. Hey, thanks for watching and don't forget to subscribe.